Thank you. I want to welcome everybody. I'm Representative Les Gara from the Independent Democratic Coalition. I'm here joined with two great legislators, Representative Harriet Drummond, former school board member and assembly member from Anchorage, and Representative Adam Wohl, owner of everybody's favorite music place in Fairbanks. There are a number of things to talk about, but obviously, the fiscal plan, or lack of one at this point, is a daily discussion in this building. And I want to shift the focus a little bit. We all believe that there should be a comprehensive fiscal plan this year, and we're all walking through the hallways trying to make sure legislators keep their minds open. As long as people keep their minds open and talk to each other, we can come up with a bipartisan fiscal plan. But the moment people move into their ideological corners and say they're not going to move over their position last year or the year before, then it probably does not become a bipartisan fiscal plan. So we're going to keep continuing to do that. None of us are going to burn down other people's ideas, and we want to keep the discussion going. That's really what I have to say about a fiscal plan. But I want to address the real way this state can end up in recession. Gunnar Knapp, the economist from the Institute of Social and Economic Research, and he's got a memo up there, has said the obvious, but a lot of people haven't followed this. If you cut too deep, and certainly we have to cut waste, certainly we have to cut things that don't work, but if you cut too deep and form a line of unemployed people across the state, not only will those state employees lose their jobs, but they won't go to grocery stores, they won't go to hardware stores, they won't go to restaurants, and all of a sudden that'll ripple through the private sector economy. And that is the method this legislature could use to create a recession. We don't want to see that happen. So on the recession issue, that's not the fiscal plan issue. You know, we can hopefully have a fiscal plan this year. If folks delay it for a year, that'll be less favorable. But the real road to a recession is cuts that go beyond government waste, cuts that go beyond necessary cuts, and all of a sudden just cut for cutting's sake. So you can tell your voters we have a $3.6 billion budget deficit instead of a $3.75 billion budget deficit. Maybe that's a notch in your belt. But what you've done at that point is you've threatened a recession, decreasing home values, lost private sector jobs, lost jobs throughout the economy. And this is an economy that is very close to recession. There was a prediction last year we'd be in one, and there's a worry this year we'll be in one. So that's what I wanted to say. I would like folks to start looking at around this building, to start looking at whether the cuts are necessary and smart ones, or whether they're just cuts that are going to lead to the path to a recession. Representative Wohl has introduced consumer protection legislation on health care. We have the highest cost of health care in the country, and he has a lot to say about it and a bill that will do something about it. Representative Wohl.
Thanks, Les. Thank you. My name is Representative Adam Wohl. I'm from District 5 in Fairbanks. I introduced House Bill 239, which would require the Department of Insurance, whenever there's a rate increase of more than 10% requested by the insurance companies, which now is down to company since MOTA pulled out of this, or was forced to pull out of the state of Alaska. We now just have Premera Blue Cross as our one provider. When they propose a rate increase of more than 10%, it will require a hearing, open up the books, and have public testimony, and to find out what the costs and causes and all the things behind the rate increase. Last year in 2016, just a month or so ago, our rates went up 39% in Alaska, highest in the nation. The next highest state was, I believe, Minnesota at 19%. So we almost doubled the next highest state. And the year before that, ours went up 31%, I believe. And the national average that year was 0%. So some states actually went down. So many states are requested to raise their insurance rates. Many states say, let's take a look at this, let's have an audit, let's open the books, and they challenge the rate increase, and many times they respond back to the insurance companies and say, no, we won't accept that. We'll accept a lower rate, but not the rates that you're requesting. Currently in Alaska, we're basically rubber stamping these rate increases. Like I said, last year 31%, this year 39%. Health insurance is a major cost for most people. Many retired people that are living here have many other costs, and when your insurance goes up that much, they're saying, I don't want to pay that much, and I'll move to another state where it's a lot lower. So it's included with fuel prices and food prices and other things that make it expensive to live up here for some people, added to that health insurance costs, and it's starting to add up for some people. So the bill introduced would require the state to examine these rate increases and challenge them. So we're pushing that through and hoping to have success with it.
Thank you, Representative Wool. And Representative Drummond is working on two pieces of legislation, and I'll turn it over to her to talk about them.
Thank you, Les. I've got two interesting pieces of legislation. One of them is actually a revenue positive bill. First, I want to start out by thanking former Senator Fred Dyson for coming up with this idea a number of years ago. It's HB 291, sport fish licenses for Yukon residents. Now, why would an Alaska legislature bill involve Yukon residents? Apparently, we have a reciprocity program in place in which Yukon Territory residents can come across the border from Canada and buy fishing licenses in Alaska at the same fee as resident Alaskan fishing licenses. And we have a reciprocity agreement in place so Alaskans can cross the border into the Yukon and buy resident fishing licenses at the same rate as Yukoners can do. It was a nice program while it lasted, but we can probably gain at least $50,000 in revenue that we're missing out on, and potentially more. Money from license sales goes solely to sport fish-related spending, including habitat restoration and abundance studies. And as Representative Gara has impressed upon us, our budget situation is going to be so serious that I don't think we can afford to overlook any single bit of additional revenue that the state can collect. And my other bill is House Bill 275 to establish Indigenous Peoples Day in Alaska on the second Monday in October. At a time when Alaska is facing this unprecedented fiscal crisis, you might ask why I would propose that we set aside a day of recognition and celebration for Alaska's people. The answer is straightforward. In these challenging times, we should remember those who have come before us, who faced far greater challenges than we do, and who adapted and engineered and created and survived. Indigenous people are an integral part of the economic, spiritual, cultural, linguistic, scientific, and historical fabric of the state of Alaska and the Americas at large. We as a state recognize the unique contributions of Indigenous people as a whole and of individual Alaska Natives for their role in making the state what it is today. Indigenous people, particularly in our state, have weathered many storms, and we as a state can learn from the resilience of our Alaska Native neighbors as we seek a solution to our fiscal crisis. Last year, Governor Walker proclaimed Indigenous Peoples Day as a one-time observance. This bill, HB 275, establishes the second Monday in October as Indigenous Peoples Day every year, a day that every Alaskan can be proud to celebrate.
Thank you. We'll open it up to questions on Representative Wool's and Drummond's legislation, or anything you'd like to talk about. Yes, Becky.
Becky Bohr with the Associated Press. Representative Gara, I guess starting with you on the budget. We keep hearing this term, we need to right-size government, and you just talked about necessary cuts. What is a necessary cut? And when you talked about a lack of a fiscal plan at this point, does that mean you don't see the governor's plan as a fiscal plan? Can you sort of explain, I guess, what you were meaning by that?
Sure. The state can't waste money. We can't throw money at things that don't make sense. And there are a number of ways the state has done that. There are a number of mega projects we can't afford right now. But the moment you start going beyond cutting waste and beyond cutting programs that don't work, and you just start cutting, then all of a sudden what you're doing is not responsible budgeting, but threatening to raise the economy to the ground. Over the last 2 years, with the governor's proposal this year and last year's budget cuts, we've lost $1.4 million from our construction academies to get people into good, high-paying construction jobs. We should be getting people into jobs, but the worry about budget cutting that goes beyond waste, beyond services that don't work, and cutting much further than that is that not only will you not increase construction jobs, you'll decrease them. We want a trained workforce. And the moment you start building a budget that takes away opportunity, takes away jobs, and harms the economy, you've done something wrong. As for the governor's plan, we're going to look at everything. People are keeping their minds open. In our caucus, I believe many members in the legislature in both caucuses are keeping their minds open. But I think what would be very dangerous right now would be for anybody to step into their ideological corners and start just criticizing everything. I want people to keep their minds open to some of the ideas I have. Others want folks to keep their minds open on ideas they have. That's how you get to a bipartisan, fair, comprehensive plan. So that's really where I'm going to leave it at that, because I don't want to criticize other people's ideas at this point. That's when it all falls apart.
Liz Raines with KTVA. One thing we've heard sort of an alignment from Democrats on is the need for reform within the oil tax credit system. We're going to be seeing that presented today in House and Senate Resources. What are your thoughts on that bill?
I think, yeah, I'll jump in. I think some reform is needed. I think last year, I think we had $700 million that was allocated to be paid in oil tax credits, although $200 million that was pushed off till next year. With the prices as low as they are, the amount of revenue we're bringing in from oil is extremely low, and if we're paying out perhaps more than we're even taking in, that's not really a tenable situation. I realize oil tax credits have been very useful in gas exploration and have paid off in a lot of ways, and especially smaller companies have done well with them. And for example, near Nenana in the interior, there's drilling for natural gas by Doyon, and they're using tax credits, and they're very appreciative and need them. On the other hand, many companies are using tax credits to perhaps leverage other loans at much higher interest rates, and I think they could be put to better use than that, and maybe some of them have to be reevaluated. So I think the whole system needs to be reevaluated, just like the state budget needs to be reevaluated, just like agency budgets need to be reevaluated, like the university budget needs to be reevaluated. It all has to be looked at, and in these times where we have a huge deficit, every little expense has to be evaluated. And one that was last year $700 million and projected to be over $1 billion definitely needs to be looked at.
Just a quick follow-up. So what about the governor's proposal specifically, what he's proposing in his bill? Does it do enough?
I'd have to have all the details exactly right in front of me to answer that question. I know he proposed some tax credit revisions, and I don't know the exact number, and I know there's a lot of different types of tax credits out there. So I'd have to. I know there's something about hardening the floor and raising the floor from 4% to 5%, and then perhaps solidifying the floor so that you can't use net loss to go beneath the 4%. These aren't simple things that I can give you an exact answer on at this very moment, but I think they'll definitely we need to look at them, and we need to address oil tax credits, and we need to shore up some of those expenses.
In tax credits than we get back in our production tax. That's projected for this coming year. It's projected for fiscal year 16, and it happened in fiscal year 15. 3 years in a row where we're paying oil companies more money than we get back in our production tax. Our production tax is supposed to be the mainstay of how we raise oil revenue in the state, and we essentially have a negative production tax. It's for a number of reasons, but we hope to look at both the weaknesses in the production tax, many of us do, and the excessive tax credits. You cannot have a system that raises such a small production tax that you're paying out more to oil companies than you get back in production taxes. And the other problem with tax credits right now is those companies that are getting The purchasable ones are paying a 0% production tax. So the state is paying, what, $500 million, maybe $1 billion a year to companies that, if they result in exploration, will have fields that will pay a 0% production tax at current prices. It's throwing good money after bad at this point, and it needs to be changed.
I'd like to weigh in on that.
Sure.
As well.
Representative Drummond.
As you've heard more than once, the governor's proposal includes something for everybody to dislike. It includes a broad-based taxes, including an income tax. Others have talked about a sales tax. I can tell you that my constituents will be very unhappy if they are asked to pay a sales tax or an income tax in order for that money to be turned over to the oil companies in the form of a tax credit. That makes 0 sense to me.
Thank you. Next set of questions. We've got Shauna Crondall online. Shauna, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. Thanks. This is Shauna Crondall with the Alaska Education Update. The House Finance DED subcommittee last night talked about broadband and broadband subsidies for school districts. Why is it the legislature seems to unquestioningly appropriate money for 90% matching federal transportation funds, but they do not do that for broadband for schools and libraries?
Representative Drummond, were you?
I'm unfamiliar with this effort.
Shauna, I think the three of us were not at the Education Budget Subcommittee last night, but that's been a problem in this legislature, and it goes to Medicaid expansion. Of course, we take the 90% federal road matching money, but there seems to be a second standard that gets applied to 100% matching money for Medicaid expansion that actually saves the state money. And the broadband issue you're talking about, if you can improve the education opportunities for Alaskans with a 90% federal match, it's something folks should consider very seriously. But I was not part of the hearing. None of us were last night, so I don't think we can tell you what happened there or what the debate was. Shauna, do you have a follow-up before we go to Becky Boer?
No. It's an ongoing issue, and I'm just wondering why there seems to be no problem accepting federal funding with only a 10% match transportation, but not for broadband.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question, Shauna. I know Representative Guttenberg has been a leader on broadband access in this caucus, and it's something that should be considered. It's you don't just passing a budget isn't just about cutting educational opportunity and cutting job opportunity. That's the wrong way to go. Becky, you had your hand up?
Becky Borth, the Associated Press. Since you brought up expansion, Judge Biffner is supposed to hear arguments tomorrow in the Legislative Council lawsuit. The Legislative Council supporters of that lawsuit say it's a separation of powers issue, and are challenging the governor's authority. And I was interested, in your thoughts. I mean, do you see this as an issue that should be settled? Should appropriately be settled with the Supreme Court?
Let me turn this over to Representative Wolf, who has heard the bill more than all of us since he was on the Health and Social Services Committee.
Yeah, we heard the Medicaid expansion bill quite a bit. And we've heard some updates on its progress and different evaluations. I think the Menges group did an evaluation recently, and it was very positive. There was, I think, 8,000 people have signed up. There are realized cost savings. There wasn't the worried effect of, I believe they call it the woodwork effect, where people come out of the woodwork suddenly to sign up. Those things weren't realized. So I think Medicaid expansion has showing that it's working well. The lawsuit that LBNA, no,
Ledge Council.
Ledge Council, I'm sorry. Ledge Council is suing the governor. I think it's counterproductive. I think, I know it's on a separation of power that the governor overstepped his bounds. That may be what they're saying, and that may be it. But I also think that it was also to slow down the Medicaid expansion, and Medicaid expansion has gone through, and I think some judges have dismissed that case, and it's moving up the ladder. And I hope it goes away, honestly.
Becky, I just want to make clear that, as you probably know, every single member of the Independent Democratic Coalition opposes that lawsuit. We think it's a waste of money. We think it creates division in a legislature that's supposed to be working together. And the most important thing about Medicaid expansion, apart from the health care that is being provided to people who are ill, is that it saves the state money and reduces our deficit. And since it's been implemented, it's done what was promised. It's leveraged federal money to pay for services the state used to pay for. It not only is smart policy, but it reduces our budget deficit. Why somebody would not want to reduce our budget deficit and argue that their concern about separation of powers is an excuse not to reduce the budget deficit is confusing, and we don't agree. Nobody in our caucus agrees with it. We should move ahead with Medicaid expansion. It saves the state money. It gets people health care. It brings jobs to the state, and it will ultimately bring over $200 million a year of federal funds into the state, which will help fight off the recession that we're all fearing. That money will ripple through the economy and create jobs. Representative Drummond, did you have something?
I do, Representative Gara, thank you. I serve on the Budget Subcommittee for Corrections, and we heard the other night from the Corrections Commissioner and his staff that Medicaid expansion is already saving the Corrections Department roughly $4 million in this fiscal year. By the time it's fully implemented, it'll save $7 million a year on a continuing basis. And this is because corrections and inmates in corrections are, if they have medical needs, the state is required to pay their full medical needs. Doesn't matter whether an inmate has a spouse with health insurance or is a Native or an American Indian who has Indian Health Services access. None of those, or Medicaid or Medicare in its previous form. None of those services can be accessed. The state has to pay the full cost. They included, I believe it was a $4 million savings in the budget that they presented a year ago, and it was denied them because the majority in the legislature did not want to expand Medicaid, so it was removed from the budget. Well, because of the governor's actions, it's back in the budget. The savings are already taking place. Inmates are getting the care that they need to keep them healthy, and corrections is showing a I don't know if you'd call it a positive cash flow. We're not trying to make money on corrections, but it's showing improvement in its bottom line, and inmates are healthier, and hopefully when they return to the community, which most inmates are going to do, they will be healthier and be able to participate in society and contribute to our society instead of being a drain. Thank you.
Any other questions? Liz?
Yeah, Liz Raines with KTVA again. Senator Stoltz mentioned earlier this week that any changes to the permanent fund, like what the governor's proposing, should be put before voters in the form of a constitutional amendment. Is that something that you agree with?
Senator Stoltz makes a fair point. What I'm going to do is not criticize people's fiscal proposals right now. I want to keep the discussion going, but certainly before you change the Constitution, you would need a vote of the people. But I'm just going to leave that there for now.
Well, I think what he was referring to is that any changes to the way that we use the permanent fund be reflected in the Constitution, that it be set in the Constitution. Do you agree that voters should be weighing in and that it should be set in the Constitution?
Coming from somebody who has once proposed an amendment that would put the formula for our permanent fund into the Constitution to protect it, I've got to say the permanent fund reduction part of the plan is not my favorite, but I'm going to keep my mind open on everything right now, and I'm just not going to get into an ideological corner. If I was going to get into an ideological corner, I'd propose my constitutional amendment again. I'm not doing that right now. I'm just trying to keep discussions going. I'm sorry if that doesn't help you, but that's just the way I think we're going to get to a bipartisan fiscal plan, by talking to each other and not burning each other's ideas down to the ground.
I guess that's one answer.
I'll give you an answer. I think there's a lot of important budget issues coming, and I don't think we can wait a long time for this. I think putting it on the out to the voters to vote on would take a while. And then, do we put other issues out there to vote on? What if someone wants to start different sources of revenue? Should that all be put out to the voters? I mean, at a certain point, we're elected to make some decisions, as long as it's within the constitutional rights that we have. If we want to change something that we would need to change the Constitution for, that's one thing. But I mean, some of these things can't wait another year, and I think that's really the urgent part. And if a plan comes together that has a lot of components, some of which may affect the permanent fund, some may involve taxes, some of which may involve oil tax credits, all this stuff. I mean, we certainly can't put a vote to the public on everything, and we're not necessarily governing by popular vote. And I think some of these things have to be looked at now before the end of session. And so my answer would be no.
Thank you.
All right, well, any other questions? Shauna, do you have any other questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. We're going to continue working towards what we think is a fair budget and a fair fiscal plan, and that means one that that doesn't just favor corporations, that doesn't just favor the wealthy, but that treats everybody fairly. And with that, we thank you for coming.